here we have our leg of lamb. Now, what I'm going to do with this is a couple of different things you can do. Obviously, beautiful leg on the bone. You can do a nice rolled leg roasting joint. You can even break it down into its individual muscles to do diced for kebabs or little leg of lamb steaks. What I'm going to do is a good one for summer barbecues is butterfly that down. So what we're going to do, first we'll take off the shank, and then we'll take out the H-bone, and then it's separating this out into a flat piece of meat, beautifully trimmed up, ready for the barbecue. I'm going to start off by taking the shank. So, as you can see here, we have a diamond, what I like to call a diamond piece of fat around here. Now, just to the bottom of that, you want to come just about a quarter of the way up, and that's where you're going to find the joint for your shank. There's your lamb shank, beautiful for slow roasts, that sort of thing. Normally I'd cut the end off, do a nice little French trim on that as well, but I'll leave it to one side for now. Next is probably a more difficult bone to take out on the leg. That's what we call the H-bone, so the hip bone that sits on the side. You've got a little ball joint in this end here, and you've got this bone comes around, just tucking underneath the bottom as you go down. So I'll try and do that as best I can to let you see, but just with the tip of my knife, just working from one end of the bone to the other. You don't want to go too deep. Most of the work is done just with that tip of the knife there. And then just as I've opened up the top there, what I'm going to do is come back round to this joint and just work around and loosen that up. I'm always pushing that bone away from the meat as I'm cutting. What that does, the weight of the bone lets me see where I'm going. On the hip joint, the reason why it's a little bit difficult is because down at this bottom piece here, you've got this small little hook at the end of the bone. You just need to get around, and the difficult thing is if you push too deep into that, you're cutting straight into the meat. Just cut around it there. As I come down, I'm just taking that bone there. Now what you've got there, you've got the end of the tail just hanging on there, and like I was saying, you've got this little difficult bone here. That's the bone that you've got to really get around, because you can be careful and you're slashing straight into the meat if you're not careful of that. As you look at the leg, what you have is you have these seams which go here. So if you look, they're going from the knee joint, and all these seams are following down. They're the seams that separate your three muscles. Now, if you start at the knee joint here, that's where I took the shank off, you've got this seam underneath the fat there. That separates what we'd call your thick, which is the muscle here at the front of the leg, and your topside, which is the muscle on the inside. Topside is generally the most tender muscle within the leg. So what I'm going to do, again, just working with the tip of my knife, is just follow that seam round. And what I'm doing, I'm trying to constantly just push that meat away. Now following that seam should lead you round to coming down to the top of the bone. And like I said, like the same as boning, always go from one end just with the tip of your knife, scraping against that bone all the way to the other. And the other thing you need to do, so I'm going to work on removing the thick from the bone now. What I'm going to do, I'm going to move the meat to suit myself. Tip of my knife working from one end to the other. It just allows you to see every piece you need to cut and work down. And eventually you'll start to work around those two big knuckles at either end of the bone. And if you lift it up, you should be able to just take off one end, and then the weight of the meat just lets you cut away the other end. Get a nice clean bone coming out the end. Now, if you look inside, you've got all these seams connecting, and you're going to just work down there and just pulling away. That just lets you see where you're going, opening out each muscle. Don't want to cut too much into the muscles just yet. We just want to see where we're going to work first. Now, you've got two little things you want to remove straight away. That's the knee joint, so this little bone here, and this little bit of meat here, which is a continuation of the shanks. It's actually part of the shin. So on a barbecue, that little bit of muscle there will be a lot tougher than the rest of the leg. So this little bit of muscle here, just like all the rest of them, works on the seam, pulls right away. That bit will go for diced or mince, but will not be good on a butterflied leg on a barbecue. So what I'm left with is the 3 main muscles that's going to go into the butterfly leg with a little bit of extra fat, which we're going to trim away. And the thing we're going to do, this fat on the outside here, we're going to trim that down a little bit. What you want to leave it with, any fat on there, you want a nice even layer. You don't want any large chunks, because obviously that'd be a little bit more difficult to render. And any cartilage you want to cut away as well. All this fat and trim and cartilage from the inside. Just want to leave ourselves with a nice clean and lean muscle. Generally, using your eye, if there's any bits you think won't cook well on the barbecue, just trim them off. Right, so when you've trimmed your leg down, the next thing, it's just a very simple process of, you want to cut slightly into those muscles. So what you're looking for is just to get a nice, as even as possible, not ever going to be perfect, flat, and you can score it a little bit and open it up as well. So you're going to marinate and get deep into the leg of lamb. So what you do, put a nice rub on there, some nice marinade, really get it deep into the muscle, then straight on a nice barbecue, and that should be beautiful. Now, the shoulder's made up of 3 bones. You've got the blade bone, which is the shoulder blade bone. That's a flat bone that sits underneath the bottom here. That leads up to here, where we have a straight marrow bone coming in from the shoulder shank or shin coming down there. So on this top bit, you've got a little key, a little clue here to the joint you're looking for. So I'm going to peel this top flap of meat off, and what that should reveal is just this little bit of fat. Now, wherever you have generally a large deposit of fat around bones, it will generally give you an idea as to where your joint is. So if you can see, you've got cartilage all going to this one spot. Now what that tells you is, I've probably got a joint underneath there. That's what I'm prepping. So I'm just going to cut straight, a little diagonal line through there, where all they're meeting. Just push that down. And that should tell me just where my joint is, and that's where I'm going to work from there. So once I know where that joint is, tip of my knife, what I want to do is come down on top of the blade bone. Go straight in. So as long as you've got your knife scraping against that bone, you open up this pocket of meat here. What that should tell you is exactly where that bone is. It reveals it, and it shows you exactly where you're going to have to cut to get that bone out. So if I loosen up that joint a little bit more, and then with the tip of my knife, I'm going to come down on either side of that bone, scraping right against the bone. Generally, if you've got your knife against the bone, you're cutting in the right direction. So you've got your ball joint there, your socket there. You want to loosen around the top of the socket. And then we want to come into just using that block just to help us, a little bit of gravity. Good sharp pull. What that does, gives you a lovely clean blade bone, leaving what would be the equivalent to your beef blade or feather blade in the lamb shoulder there. And the knife. Take that out. So that's loosened up that part of the shoulder there. And there, next I will move to what we call this marrow bone here. Fairly simple. 2 ways of doing it. I can tunnel bone it. If I was going to roll it, I would tunnel bone it, and that would leave me a cavity inside the meat. This time I'm just going to do a straight bone, because this will be going for maybe a diced lamb or a butterflied shoulder. So with the straight, I can start at the shin, loosening off this bit of cartilage there. It's fairly easy. Tip of your knife all the way down, following the bone as you go. Don't even have to look. That knife will tell you exactly the direction you're heading. And same again, I'm going to start one end, work it all the way to the other, and keep going like that. And then I'm going to work on the other side. The tricky bit is when you get to the bottom of that, I guess it's a shoulder joint there, or elbow joint, sorry, is the bone comes out with a nice hard point at the end. So you just want your knife just to come around that. Eventually, what you want to do, just loosen either end. Always let the weight of the meat pull away. Makes it a whole lot easier. taking your bone off in one piece there. Bones could put to one side, lovely for stocks, stews, anything to add a bit of flavour. And what you've got there is your completely boneless shoulder. A couple of things you can do for it. You can trim it down, roll it into a beautiful rolled joint. This time of year, most people would like to use it for, a lot of people do use it for mince this time of year. One good thing to use it for, which doesn't get recognisably used for, would be to trim off a lot of this top muscle here, which is a shin joint, trim that down. And similar to the leg would be to trim up the rest of this meat, butterfly it out. A little bit of a slower cook on the barbecue, but a really fantastic flavour.